Hi, everyone. This is Trace, and thank you for joining me with that 90s witch. I am so excited to introduce to you Christine Cunningham Ashworth. Christine's true love is the written word. She published her first novel in 2011, and since then, she has published over 10 novels, numerous short stories, and the nonfiction essay collection, Where the Pearls and Other Bits of Wisdom. Her writing prowess is a testament to the legacy left by her father, fiction author Chet Cunningham, and that of her brother Scott Cunningham, who pioneered modern witchcraft. During the last 3 decades, Christine has picked up the torch of Scott's legacy, as he urged her to do, and is running with it. She believes magic is everywhere, from the hypnotic relationship with mirror and self as she rehearsed ballet positions, to utilizing breath as a way to experience a moment of bringing yourself into mindfulness. Christine lives her craft. Time spent fireside or walking along the ocean shore reinforces her heart-centeredness and speaks to her of the dynamic synchronicity of the world. A native of San Diego, Christine lives with her husband Tom in Southern California. You can find out more about her at christine-ashworth.com. Welcome to that 90s witch. Welcome to that 90s witch, Christine Ashworth. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Therese, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so Christine, like we were talking about a little bit before we actually got on the show, your book about your brother, Scott Cunningham, The Path Taken, was one of my big inspirations for that 90s witch because it really brought back so much for me. Like so many people, Scott Cunningham was a huge influence on me as a young witch, particularly in the 90s. And I resonated so strongly with his work, but also him, like the spirit that I could feel behind the words. I resonated so strongly with him. And I didn't know until later on that Scott was also a gay man, and that was also a journey I was undertaking. I knew I was a witch before I knew I was gay. And so I feel like I resonated with that without even knowing that about Scott quite at that time. And so I just couldn't wait to have you come on that 90s witch to talk about your brother and to talk about your amazing book, The Path Less Taken. So Christine, I'm kind of curious, what was your experience? Were you a 90s witch? What was your experience being a 90s witch?
I was not.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I was not. I missed all the witch movies. I've not seen a single one, and I've been shamed at that. I mean, people have said, "You've got to watch The Craft. You have to watch Practical Magic. You have to watch Hocus Pocus, if nothing else." And I haven't seen any of them. Um, in the 90s, I was a mom. I was raising kids. My firstborn was born I was 3 months pregnant with him when Scott was diagnosed. And I
Mhm.
was 3 months pregnant with my second child when Scott died. So I was very much into mom mode. I was my husband took care of the kids during the day, and I went off to the corporate job. And so I was really busy.
Yeah.
I don't remember what year it was that I've been 2009. I don't remember. I'm terrible with dates. Christopher Penczak reached out to me for a piece that he could include in his Ancestors of the Craft book.
Yes.
And we had some wonderful talks. And almost, I actually went ahead, paid the money to do the Temple of Witchcraft first year. And then I just like, okay, how am I going to do this? I'm writing fiction. I have a day job. I've got my little kids. How am I going to juggle all these things? So I ended up not going through with it. I have the book, have the original book and the recordings, but so yeah, the 90s, I was not there.
Yeah, you were busy doing other things, which is
Yeah.
so interesting because your brother, Scott Cunningham, spawned a whole generation of 90s witches with his work. And you, from what I understand, when I read The Path Taken, you and Scott were close, but also, and I can relate to this so deeply as many gay and queer people can, even today, I would imagine, is that you were close, but also distant
Yes.
because
That's
Scott had this close life with you. He had this version he was with you and his family that was a real part of him, but then also like so many queer people had to do and still have to do, there were these other sides of him that just existed outside of that universe.
yeah, totally. He had not only the, you know, and I knew he was gay. I mean,
Yeah.
it was hard spending a lot of my formative years in a ballet company. I knew there were gay men, and there were the men who liked the men and the men who liked the women, and usually the men who liked the men were the safer people to be with. Not always, but usually for someone my age. Um, so that really didn't bother me. But he has also had all the witchcraft stuff going on, which
Which you also knew about, right? He invited you into that as well.
I knew it. I knew about it at home, but I didn't know he went out and did it too.
Mm.
I
You didn't know he
really,
published it or had other witch friends or covens or anything
yeah,
like that.
he didn't. His first book was Magical Herbalism, and that came out in 1983. So actually, a lot of his work that the 90s witches took took good advantage of was published in the 80s.
Yeah.
And that was back when it wasn't even called metaphysical or witch, it was called oracle, it was called New Age.
Yeah.
New They had the New Age bookshelf was like this big, and Scott's book was there, and Raymond Buckland's book was there, and there were some others on astrology and that I don't.
As it always was, Linda Goodman's Sun Signs, a couple
Yes.
books on witchcraft, something about beware of Satanism or get involved in Satanism, and
Right.
then something about ghosts. And that was your
Right.
that was your section. Yeah.
That was yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about that too is because we were coming off the late 70s, early 80s satanic panic. And
Hmm.
so um when the movies started coming out in the 90s, it kind of gave permission to explore, and it just kind of exploded, which was great.
Yeah, it totally gave permission. Yeah, it absolutely it brought witchcraft and witches home to everybody, and something I talked with somebody else about with The Witch Next Door. Like it really created an archetype in an even stronger way than even Bewitched or eras previously of you, though you could have a witch next door. You could be the witch next door.
Right.
It's just a matter of picking it up, right? Like, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so even though Scott's most of his books were published in the 80s, I feel that like I said, not only did he spawn a whole generation of witches in the 90s, but he was one of the first and biggest advocates of solo practice and solitary practice and following this path without a coven or even without necessarily a teacher.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was also something that really characterized the 90s, especially in terms of later publications. And maybe that's because of the success of Scott's works like Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, and Living Wicca. But afterwards, that was really almost everywhere in publishing after Scott was here's how you could do this on your own. Was he the first person to introduce that to your knowledge?
I believe so, yes. Um, and one of his driving um, reasons for publishing to begin with was when he was looking for guidance. He was lucky. There were actually three different traditions that he was able to study under other people in person. And in San Diego,
Mhm.
conservative Navy run San Diego. Um, but you go into the breadbasket of the country, and you've got, strong religious, church on every corner, and you're not going to find a coven as easily. You're not going to find anything probably in your library um, on witchcraft. And he really wanted, I mean, there was a lot of driving reasons behind it, but I think part of it was he was tired of people sniping at each other. The witch wars of the 80s and 90s, because you're doing it wrong. No, you're doing it wrong. Well, there is no right way. There is no right way. And so to give people those tools, it's kind of like, not really, but kind of like, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man how to fish, he can eat for life. It's that kind of thing. So his books live on, and anyone can pick them up and anyone can learn. And I think the proliferation of books that have come after him has just been a testament to how important his place was in the community. And he got death threats
Yeah.
for publishing what he did.
From other witches. Let's just add that in
From
there with
other
other
witches.
witches. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it
not
wasn't
from the
crazy Christian
Christians,
nationalists. It was from other witches. Yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, come on, people. Um, we had a post office box at that point in time. So all of his fan mail would come to the post office box rather than, and it had to go through Llewellyn anyway,
Mhm.
because they wouldn't give out authors' personal addresses, which was nice. But so he was never really in danger, but it makes you kind of itchy to even think about things like that. So yeah, he took a risk. Llewellyn took a risk on his solitary practitioner book. I've got his bibliography here, so let me check to see when that one was. Okay, that came out in 1988.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And so I think the first, like, he shopped magical herbalism to all the big publishers, and then all the little ones, and nobody would take it because nobody knew how to market it. Llewellyn was the people. They were the publishing company that took a chance on him, and so we're very grateful for that, because he was loyal to the bone with Llewellyn.
And from what I understand as well, I think there were some other authors that also were part of this, but this was also also a big break for Llewellyn, because Llewellyn started getting into the magical witchcraft Wicca publishing, whereas before it had been a little bit more astrology based, a little bit more New Age based. And I think it was with Scott that they really started opening the door to Wiccan witchcraft pagan publishing.
I've never said this on a podcast before, but my dad always said that Llewellyn is the house that Scott built.
Yeah, I
And
can see that.
all of his books are still in publication, every single one of them. And he died 31 years ago. So,
Yeah.
like I said, I'm extremely grateful to Llewellyn for taking the chance on him.
And speaking of risk, we talked about, or you mentioned the threats that Scott was receiving. You mentioned even, Llewellyn taking a risk on this subject matter and moving out there. But one of the things that always struck me reading your book and even thinking back on Scott over the decades, was the number, the just everything about his life was a risk, and the risks that he rose to, right? He was a gay man and a witch, and public about both of those things, at least to some degree, and even more on the witchcraft side at this time in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. And he took a lot of risks. He lived his life kind of on that edge. He gave himself to his community. And that's one of the things that really struck me reading your book about him is that he really gave himself to his community. His books were really an offering. They truly were an offering to this community. His life was an offering to it. How much he pushed himself towards the end of his life to write those books and complete those projects and continue to tour as much as he could. Um, and so I'm curious, Christine, were you as aware of the risks he was taking at the time?
No, no. For one thing, I had no idea that he in December of 92 that he went to Llewellyn's Christmas party. I had no idea. I don't know if my dad went with him. I don't know. I can't imagine he'd go alone because he his vision was almost gone by that point. Um, but he was bound and determined to say goodbye to everybody that he'd come to know so well. So no, the risks. He did tell me that he was diagnosed in 1990 with HIV. He had been celibate by that point for over 10 years. So, his risks were minimized, I guess, in that respect, because a lot of horrible things happened and still happen to gay men.
Yeah.
And so it's complicated.
It's
I
got to
love
be so
him,
complicated.
it's complicated. And but going back to the book, Nancy Hendrickson did a fabulous numerology on him. And
Mhm.
when I read it, sorry, I'm getting teary-eyed. When I read it, it's like, oh my God, this is him. This is him. This is him. He's there to be a master teacher. He's there, and his um it kind the, from what I remember, and I could be remembering this wrong, but it was like once he was done, he was done. He it, not that she said that he was expecting a short life or that his numbers said he was going to have a short life, but that's kind of what I got from it. And
Mhm.
but it was just so him. And if anyone wants to know what he was really like, read the numerology section. It's him to a T. It really is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, he was absolutely he really was a teacher. He was so devoted to it. And I really loved how you pointed out that when he was collecting his information for magical herbalism, when he was doing his magical research, that there just simply was not the information today. And not only was it not there, you just couldn't access it either. There was no internet. It was very difficult to find. And you just had to you grabbed onto whatever scrap you could find and wrote it down, recorded it, and tried to make it, either fit it in or see if it worked for you or something like that. And he not only dedicated himself to collecting that information, but then also publishing it, right? Making sure that other people could have it at a time when people weren't publishing necessarily these kinds of things. There were witchcraft books being published at the time, but many of them were sensational, or many of them, were more character based, you could say, like Sybil Leek, who I also love, but it was more focused on her as a personality and less about the information necessarily that she was offering, which is also wonderful, but it was just different. And One of the things that really struck me about that is reading it and seeing this is that I just resonated so much with Scott, and I really put myself in that position because I know as a witch and a gay man, you're talking about how complicated it was. It was so complicated for me and my relationship with my family at a very young age and continues to still be very complicated. And I just imagine what it was like for Scott in the 80s, in the 70s to be both of these things, and what a tremendous blessing to still have the love and support of his family through all of this
Yeah.
and just really sticking through him through everything and supporting him and loving him through everything. And I read that and I think what a blessing that is that Scott had that and how different that was from my own experience as a witch and a gay man, even growing up in the 90s. Um,
Yeah.
and just how much how beautiful that is on your family side, and just I really want to just acknowledge that, and also to say just how brave Scott was, because I know how brave you have to be in order to be both of those things when the world's against you.
Yeah. I don't think he would consider it bravery. I think he would consider it stubbornness.
Well, I can relate to that too.
He,
So
yeah,
yeah.
it's semantics. He had a thirst for knowledge
Yeah.
that everything he learned just pushed him to learn more. And then he got to a certain point. I think of it as he got to a certain point where he had to get it all down on paper, put it out in the world so he could get more knowledge in, and
Yeah.
because otherwise the brain would fill up and he's like, oh, what am I going to do with all this? But the times I think my dad was happiest was when Scott was in the den with him working on his fiction, and my dad
Mhm.
was working on his fiction. He published over 350 novels during his lifetime. My dad did.
Wow.
Yeah, he was incredible. He was always home. My parents were an anomaly in the day. um my mom didn't work, so they were both always home. My home was the safe home in the neighborhood. My parents didn't
Mhm.
drink, they didn't smoke, they didn't swear. Never saw them argue ever. And I know they must have had arguments, but never in front of us kids, which, I mean, good for them, but it also, I did not learn how to argue and I'm still really bad at it. So, um, one tiny downside, but it was kind of like the Brady Bunch. It was, Leave It to Beaver. It was a very safe, loving, happy home. We didn't have a lot of money, but it didn't feel like we were lacking anything. It was what it was. And we had our apricot tree in the backyard, and later on my dad had all sorts of things growing, and
Mhm.
he came from a farming family, so he taught us how to plant and how to trim roses and how to uh, yeah fertilize things and how to keep things alive, and it was so we all took turns watering the yards and just taking care of the landscape around us. And our camping trips were, you know you take only pictures, leave only footprints type thing. You clean the area before you start, um, before you set up camp, and then you thoroughly clean the area after when you but just before you pull out. And it was just such a nurturing environment that I think he thrived in a way that he wouldn't have in
Mhm.
any other sort of environment. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Something that you hear people say, even to this day, about Scott's books is that people will talk about how they are quote unquote fluffy, or they're quote unquote fluffy bunny or too new age or something like that, right? They kind of have that in there. But what's really interesting to me, and I can see that kind of thread in there, and yeah, like there was a lot of things being blended at the time, but you know, newsflash, magic's always blending with everything around it all of the time. But anyway, and so there were kind of these, and I can kind of see where they were going with this, but looking back, I really see not fluffiness really going on with Scott or his books as much as I honestly see responsibility.
Yeah.
And I really see that in the sense that he felt that responsibility to share his knowledge, to collect that knowledge, to seek out that knowledge, to share that knowledge, to make it available for other people, and not just for fun, even if it was fun for him. Like I could really see, or at least I feel looking back from your book and my experience with his work, this level of responsibility. And so I found a quote in your book that I wanted to read because I thought that this really encapsulated that level of responsibility and also just how much Scott gave his life for us to be where we are today in terms of witchcraft and Wicca. Is you said writing his books was a way for Scott to provide for others, those who did not have the teachers or advantages that he had. This responsibility weighed on him to the point that the last 3 years of his life, he pushed himself hard to get books completed before he couldn't anymore.
Yeah.
And I just really want to emphasize that today in this show because his books are and could still continue to be very accessible. Maybe that's considered fluffy. Maybe that's too new age, whatever, however people want to put it. They're extremely accessible.
Yeah.
But that wasn't because he was making light of the craft or the subject matter or the depth of commitment people had for their spiritual path. It's because he felt a responsibility. At least that's the way I see it now. What do you think about that?
I agree 100%. Well, of course, because it's my quote. Of course, I'm going to agree.
Yeah.
But he, and I don't know if I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but from the outside looking in and reading his books, it's like he approaches them assuming that the person reading has no knowledge.
Hmm.
And so he kind of takes your hand and walks you through, and in a very kind and gentle manner, not if you don't do it this way, you're an idiot. You know, it's more of a, if you don't have these ingredients, use what you have around your house. You know, find what works for you. He would be the first person to say, yeah, if my way doesn't work, but my way plus Matt Oren's way mashed together works, then go. You do that. Whatever works for you. And I think one of the things that might be missing in a lot of in this witch talk era that we're in right
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
is that sense of personal responsibility for your
Yes.
own training, for your own magic, for deep diving, and not assuming that, for instance, just because you pick up a tarot deck, that you can all of a sudden hang your shingle out and read tarot for people.
Yes, absolutely.
You can't just pick up Scott's Wicca book, read half of it, and then hang your shingle and say, I'll be happy to do spells for you. You know, that's not being personally responsible. And I think in a lot of, I think in the 90s, that personal responsibility was there.
Hmm.
In looking back, but it's now, and I hate being one of those old people saying these youngsters these days, you know, but it's not only the personal responsibility that in many cases is missing, but it's also the scholarship. It's
Yes.
the being willingness to say you don't know and you're on a path of learning, and it's going to take you a few years, you know, not
Right.
6 months. It's going to be longer than a year and a day. It might take you 4, 5, 6 years to really feel comfortable in your own skin about what it is you're doing. It's it's taken me, gosh, at least that long. The first time, okay, I've got two stories for you. If you
Yes, please.
don't mind.
Yeah.
These are post Scott passing. In 2005, I worked for a clothing store called Coldwater Creek, which no longer has physical clothing stores, which is really sad. Um, and I met that first year, I met this gal, and she was a witchy gal. And she introduced me to Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab, which is the best medical grade perfume oils company you can ever find.
They do smell delicious.
Oh my God. I have well, it's we'll talk about that later. um, um, and she took me to the one metaphysical store in Simi Valley that we had. And I was mentally scattered. My writing was hit and miss. My mom was not doing well. And I walked into this beautiful store that also doesn't exist anymore. And Michael, the proprietor, took two steps back and he said, "Girl, you are scattered. Your energy's all over the place. What is up with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know." But she bought me this beautiful pendant necklace that I still have. And he gave me something. I don't remember what it was, but I ended up spending money there, quite a lot of money there over the few years they were there. But that was my first real, nudge against my consciousness saying, "You're fucking up. You can fix this, but you have to do the work." Mm-hmm. And about 2 years later, I was wearing rings with different colored stones on them. I had different colored stones in my ears. My crystal pendant, and this older man walked in and he bought some clothes for his wife. And I was packing these up and we were chatting, and he was gorgeous to look at. I mean, he was probably 6 foot, very fit, like a cowboy kind of guy, curly silver white hair, mustache, full beard, had that sage energy about him.
Yeah.
And he got quiet. He said, "So I'm seeing the amethyst and the carnelian and the garnet and honey, what are you looking for?" And I went,
"Oh,
"I don't know, a teacher?" He goes, "Oh, good luck. They're hard to find." And then he walked away. And it was just like, okay. So I started reading more and getting more, but that was, let's see, 2005, 2007. That was a long time ago. That was over 10 years ago. That was a long time ago. And I'm still not certain of my path. I'm still searching. And there are, as I say in the book, there are a lot of paths you can take. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of paths that have not yet been paved, mm-hmm. that don't exist yet. So it's an exciting time now. And building on what we had in the 90s. Because we kind of lost our way in the 2000s, I think.
I agree.
But with the onset of COVID, that sales of metaphysical books shot through the roof in 2020, 2021. Shot through the roof. It was outstanding.
The number of people identifying as witches shot through the roof, or psychics or tarot readers, or, even into other sort of like related but more distant demographics, star seeds and light workers and all of these sorts of things, right? But it just exploded around that time all over again. And, I really think that you are also one of those people who are paving a new way, at least for Scott at this time, because one of the things I remember was the initial biography of Scott that came out in the 90's.
Hmm.
And how that's also mentioned in your book, and
Hmm.
how different that biography had to be compared to the one that you wrote. And so that's why I consider you paving a new way too, because you're giving us more of who Scott really was that in a way couldn't even been expressed in the 90's when that original biography came out. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Um, I can't really talk about the biography that they wrote. It's out of print.
Yep.
You can find a copy, get one. There are some inconsistencies in there, some inaccuracies, which I'm also not going to point out because what's the point? Um, I was actually in 2018, I went to my first tarot conference and I was like, I found my people. you know, it was just so unjudgmental and so open and so welcome. It's the Northwest Tarot Symposium up in Portland. And it was great. And then because of that, because I started talking about tarot online, another friend of mine reached out and said, hey, do you want to come out and give a talk at, or a couple talks at the Phoenix Fire Pagan Gathering out here in Florida? And I said, sure, because they paid my airfare. So I didn't have to worry about
That's
that.
pretty easy. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so I was giving a talk and talking about Scott, and I had people come up to me afterwards and say, thank you so much for sharing about the person behind the books. Because he died before social media exploded. And nobody really knew who he was.
That's right.
Um, so I was in a unique position. I mean, my girlfriend finally sat me down. She said, look, because at that point, my dad had died the year before. My mom had died in 2007. My older brother, Greg, is still, thank you, still alive and still loving and still up north of here. But he was not there. He moved out at 19 when he got married in
Mhm.
73. So it was just Scott and I. And then we got our own place in 78. So I was the only one left. I was the only one who could talk about him in those times. And sure, he had friends, but they didn't live with him. They didn't grow up with him. They didn't have a shared history as long as the shared history that I had with him. And I know that Donald Michael Craig, they shared an apartment together for like 6 years. And Don wrote a small book about him, about sharing with him. And there were things in there that I never knew. And I didn't know that when he was on deadline, he'd have an ashtray and was smoking cigarette after cigarette because I never saw him smoke. I never smelled smoke on his body. I knew he smoked, but I never saw evidence of it. So,
Oh, to be a fly on that apartment wall.
right,
Yeah.
right. Um, it dawned on me that I kind of had a responsibility to share what I knew in case, I got hit by a bus
Mhm.
before I could get it out. And so that was my that and the fact that I had a horrible fiction writing year in 2018. It was just nasty, awful, never want to repeat it. And I was burned out on writing fiction. So at the end of 2018, early 2019, I turned to writing the book about Scott. And it was hard.
I
I'm
can
not gonna
only
lie. It
imagine.
took me 4 years. And I mean, not 4 years of just sitting every day, 4 years of, okay, what am I going to write about? Okay, his wallet. I'll write about his wallet. Done. Walk away, close that file, and then don't look at it for another 3 months,
Yeah.
because it 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 was hard, you know,
Yeah.
reliving the the awful times.
Yeah.
Um, but it was also good to relive the great times.
Hmm.
So it balanced out. But I still cry at the parts where I say I'm crying as I write this. I still cry when I read that. So it's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious too, Christine, with that in talking about, now was the time you felt that this was the time to write about Scott's life. And so some of the things that you shared in this book for the first time that I just really want to, also emphasize here is that you could talk about his life to the degree that you knew it with him being a gay man.
Yeah.
You could talk about how he actually passed. You could talk about the fact that he did have AIDS. You could talk about um, more about who he really was. And you can let me know if this is accurate without the same sort of fear of it somehow tarnishing him when he couldn't defend himself. Right.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I say right at the beginning, if you're expecting a salacious tell-all, you've come to the wrong place, because I don't know any of those things. I don't know who he dated. I don't know who he was in love with. I don't know. I do know that um, he was okay being alone. He had no problem with it.
Mhm.
Because I told him, I said, look, my one regret is that you never found that soulmate that you could go through life with. And he said, I'm fine alone. I'm better off. It's all good. It's all good. And but that is also why every time I see a same-sex wedding, I get so happy. It just my joy just, bubbles up, because he couldn't have that, but so many other people are getting that now. And I'm
Yeah.
so thankful that part has turned around in our society. Hopefully will stay that way.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Yes, absolutely. Hopefully we'll stay that way. And yeah, it's really it's humbling how much things have changed and still how far we have yet to go. But I'm glad for how much things have also changed. Truly. I have another quote that I wrote down here that you wrote, and I've got a couple questions about it because you say, I'm sharing now, writing this book, because who he was has informed who I am becoming. I want to share him, the boy and man I knew, because I'm the only one who can. It wasn't time for me to open up about this any earlier than right now. And I'm curious about two things, and we'll work kind of backwards on that. But what was it? Was it personal? It sounds like there was a little aspect of it being personal for why it wasn't ready any earlier than when you did. But was it also conditional? Like, was it cultural? Was it broader timing? Was it political? Like, what was it that felt like it couldn't have been done earlier for you?
It was all personal. I
All
just didn't,
personal. Yeah, okay.
I wasn't ready, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and I never thought anyone would be interested. I
Hmm.
didn't even, it didn't even dawn on me to write a book until someone said, you're going to write a book about him, aren't you? I'm like,
Right.
uh, no. And by the end of that weekend, it was like, yes, you are going to write a book about him. And I said, okay. Um, so it was circumstantial, and it was coming to the awareness that, yeah, this needs to get done.
Yeah.
It's not cultural at all, though. I don't. It's one of those things where you how do you introduce yourself to people, especially in the magical community, with without sounding pretentious or
Mm.
precious or bragging? It's difficult. And I was just at the Southern California Divination Conference, which is only it's in its second year, which we need more conferences in California. And I was just there. It was a 1-day conference on Saturday, and it was great. And I went to Polity Ashcraft's talk on herbs for divination, and I had never met her before. I knew 3 people there, and they knew who I was. I mean, because we're tight. We'd been at other conferences, and they were aware. But Polity, at the very end of her talk, held up Scott's magical herbalism book. And she said, and this is my Bible. And if you don't know Scott Cunningham, shame on you. And so after she was done, I went up and I said, thank you for your talk. This was brilliant. And I just have to let you know I'm Scott Cunningham's sister. And she squealed. She wrapped me in a hug so tight I almost couldn't breathe, which was fabulous. And she said, he is everything to me. He got me. It was beautiful. But I've also had those experiences where I will go and somebody will say, oh, and Christine's Scott Cunningham's sister. And the person goes, oh, that's nice. It's like, so and that was even before the book came out. It's a hard tightrope to walk,
Yes.
And so after the book came out, it became a little easier because then I could say, well, I wrote a book, if that interests you. But I also try not to, I don't push it because it's, I don't need the cold shoulder, I don't need the squeals and hugs either. But if it's going to help somebody else, and I talked to one of the people that put the conference on Saturday and said, hey, I am here, use me, I'm happy to help you grow this conference in any way I can. And so he was very his name is Jeffrey. He was very glad to hear that. And that's, if I can use being Scott's sister as a way to help other people, then I will do that 100%. I have no problems with that. But I do not need to use it for getting a big head. I don't need the ego boost. I have got too many other things on my plate to deflate that big head anyway. So,
Well, it's complicated. It's complicated being a relative or a close associate of somebody who is famous, and we'll just go ahead and use that word for Scott because Scott is famous in our worlds, if not beyond it, right? And it's hard being closely related or associated with a famous person because you then also get like the fallout of their projections, whether it's I'm going to hug and squeal and be so excited to meet you, which is genuine, obviously, on one level, but you're also not Scott, so you're getting some of the Scott love via, third party, right? And then also other people's projections who they've got their issues, whatever they are, and then somehow now those are also magically your issues, right? And so that's more it's a complicated road to walk. And I just got to say, throughout the whole book, like I never even got the slightest inkling that you were writing that book to say, I'm Scott's sister and listen to all the things about, me being Scott's sister. I thought you did such a beautiful job of not only really describing your family, which I admit I wasn't sure I was into in the beginning, but by the time I got through it, I was like, oh, I'm so glad she spent the time to really introduce this family in an intimate way to me, because it was so clear that the family was pivotal to all of you, and especially to Scott. And it was the fertile soil that grew Scott Cunningham in all of his facets.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to say that I feel like you really highlighted Scott's experience and didn't get any inkling in there whatsoever that this was about, look how special I am as Scott Cunningham's sister. I didn't see that at all.
Thank you.
Although I am kind of curious, a little behind the scenes stuff, right? Did Scott ever talk to you about what was going on in the Wiccan witching world at the time? Like, did he talk about, like, the witch wars you brought up, for example? Did he share with what was going on there? Did he share his perspectives on witchcraft as it was and what his vision of the future of witchcraft might be?
No, I got that all from his books.
Okay.
All of it from his books. And a lot of times in the introduction, this book was written because
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
all right, that's cool. But no, I knew they existed. Just every now and then he just come in just exasperated about something. And that was usually I don't know. I know in the late 80s, early 90s, he was on a couple bulletin boards.
Mm-hmm. Like
Um,
on the internet?
yeah.
Yep. Okay. Oh,
He-
go. I didn't know that. I didn't know Scott was on the internet in the early. Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
on one there's a an essay by Lynn Red, I think, in the book. And she talks about how they were on this witchy bulletin board. It was one of the few safe places that they had to talk. And the group wasn't very big, but they started an argument, and she didn't say what the argument was about. And so we said, well, I'm going to bring Scott in and let him, school us all. And so Scott came in and he explained, and kind of things kind of settled down. And then he just stayed, and he'd answer any questions that anyone had, or, they chit chat. And it was, so I think if he were still around today, he would be learning from everybody. Because that's just the way he is. He would be out there. Well, he was an early adopter, so I think he would have been out there probably on Witch Talk, scolding the youngsters.
Yeah.
And he would have done online classes, and he would have done, whatever he could to help other people. Yeah, I really believe that. Did I get away from your question?
No, I don't think so. I was going right along with you if you did. I was enjoying the conversation if you did get away from it. No, I think that you were just speaking to yeah, no, I think that was speaking to it. One of the things that's coming up for me is you're sharing all of this about, how Scott would still be out there. He'd be right on top of the online classes and have his own TikTok account and be making his videos. He was an early adopter. He'd be right out there doing all of these things. And one of the things that I always associate with Scott, from the feeling I got from his work and work and practicing some of his practices as he shared them, one of the qualities I associate with Scott the most is joy, and in the feeling of sacredness. I really feel like that shines through a lot of his books, is that he really wanted the craft and for your exploration of it to be joyful and to be deeply meaningful, and to know that this was a sacred path. Yes, it was a path of magical power, and that was important, but that this was also a joyful, this was a religion. If he used that word, this was a religion of joy. This was a religion of celebration. And I think he really both highlighted that in his work and lived that.
Yeah. He was, it's funny that you use joy. I don't think I ever would have put that word to him. He was, in person, he was not cynical, but very, very sarcastic sense of humor. I guess he did have a very cynical outlook on a lot of life. And I think where he did get the joy and the deeper meaning was in his practice.
Mhm.
And that's where he felt safe, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but he was very guarded, especially on people he didn't know. If you were introduced to him for the first time, it took a while to break down those barriers because he wasn't sure where he stood in your eyes, and he wanted to didn't want to trip up or do anything to make you react badly. I guess I'm not
Sure.
entirely sure what I'm saying here. um
Well, I can relate, and maybe it's not exactly the same, but I mean, especially even in the time period, being both, a gay man and a witch, and really not wanting to like fight with everybody about it or have to prove yourself all the time or have to come out of the closet every 5 seconds, and just trying to you sometimes just get along and connect with people
yeah,
with where they're at, right?
yeah.
And I could see that being a strategy that he used.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, he was he was something else, man.
Yeah, and he must have been. He really must have been, because he did. He really and what a testament to family support. I also noticed he was a Cancerian, correct? He was born June 27th. Is that accurate?
That is 1956.
1956, a Cancerian. And so it made so much sense too about why the nurturing family was so important to who Scott was and grew into be, and really probably gave him the foundation to be such a trailblazer at a time when it was risky to be that kind of trailblazer. It was pretty far out there to be gay and a witch, and maybe he wasn't super public with the gay part, but obviously there were enough people who knew it. That information made its way to me as a teenager in the 90s about Scott after he had passed, simply because of how many people he knew personally and how many people
Yeah,
he talked with. And so he must have been out of the closet with a number of other witches and Wiccans, and people in this
yeah.
world. But yeah, truly a trailblazer. Christine, if you could, I want to kind of have a two-for question for this for you. And if you don't feel like you can answer one of them, that's totally okay. But if you think that if Scott would want to give something to the witch culture of today, what might you think that that would be? And what's your perspective on witch culture today? And what's your vision of the future?
Oh, good Lord. Um, wow. Good questions, man. Um,
It could even be a hope for the future. Vision sounds too big.
well, I think for Scott, he would want to remind people of the responsibility they have to themselves and to the craft. And not everything has to be shared.
Hmm.
There are some things that just don't share. Just keep it to yourself. Everybody lives their lives so openly online that it's not necessarily a good thing. Um, and I think for myself, I have no idea where witchcraft is going for the future.
Yeah.
I mean, I I don't think we will ever have a unifying body
Hmm.
because traditions are traditions and they're so very different, and that it doesn't matter. And I wish people wouldn't throw stones, at the Wiccans, and the Wiccans wouldn't throw stones at the witches, and the Gardnerians and the Alexandrians and the Norses and the pagans and the heathens. You know, we're all on a nature path. We are all on a love and Mother Earth path. And that's what we need to really focus on, is taking care of the planet we live on. Because if we don't do that, there will be no future. And I do think that I think that the tower has fallen.
Mm.
the tower has fallen. Byron Ballard has been talking quite a few years now about we're in tower times. Well, the tower has now fallen and we need to rebuild. And to rebuild, we need to think of how we can do that as a community. And that means reaching out to the neighbors that you live next to but do not know. That means working side by side, no matter what their religious beliefs are, or the color of their skin, or their sexuality, because it doesn't matter. It's the planet matters, and if we don't take care of it, nobody's going to. It's the bees and the birds are doing their bit, the plants are doing their bit, the mammals and the ocean going mammals and fish and everybody, all the animals are doing what they can do to take care of the planet, but we are not, and we are the stewards. And that's where I would love to see a common ground among all the different pagan faiths, whether you consider it a religion or not. I don't care. It doesn't matter. But that is where I would love to see the future of our ilk go.
I love that. I love that for a number of reasons, because I can see that as also part of Scott's vision of the future, because he was very focused on the earth and nature. And I think that that's even where magical herbalism came in, is he wanted people to start discovering nature again and the magic of nature. And so I love that, because I could see that as also Scott's vision. And I love it too, because it really echoes what I've heard a lot of people say is almost having lost the thread of being earth-centric or earth-honoring or nature-oriented or nature religion, right? And not that it's gone, but that we've started focusing in different areas, which is good for information, but it's such an important thread. And I think it's such an important reason of why we emerged as such a cultural influence at the time that we did, all over again, as witches, as Wiccans, as pagans. Is because I truly do believe the earth is asking for her witches to help her out.
I agree. I agree 100%.
Yeah. So, well, Christine, is there anything else you'd love to share with that 90s witch and our listeners about Scott, about your experience? Anything that you'd like to share with us?
I think when you hear in your head a loved one talk to you, you're not making it up. They really are talking to you. And it took me a bit to get comfortable with and to understand, and that those words that were coming in Scott's voice were Scott's words, and they were his voice. And me arguing with him was me, and he would come back. And so, it's until, I don't want to say you have to be in the right mind frame to receive the messages, but you definitely have to be open to it. And I didn't realize I was closed to it, but it wasn't until I started writing the book that, in the part of the preface that is still there from the very first time I sat down to write, it's like, Scott's like, okay, just get on with it. It's like, okay, I better get on with it. And that was the first time that I heard him. And I'm gonna tell you one more story.
Yeah, please do.
You mentioned in the when you read that bit about me, about taking his legacy and running with it. That came directly from a dream that I had. I was 2022. I had gotten some bad feedback about the book, didn't know where to go with it. And this was, I called it my ugly book baby at that time, because it really was an ugly book baby. I hadn't put together the proposal yet, and I was still floundering, and all the contributors hadn't been asked to contribute yet. It's way early. And I didn't know what to do with the book. I really had no idea what to do with it. And I got really drunk one night and just tried to, and I went to bed, upset and unhappy and drunk as a skunk. And one of those, I've had two dreams in my life, three dreams in my life that have stuck with me through the years. And this is one of those three. And I dreamt that I was in a warehouse in the San Fernando Valley, the east end of the San Fernando Valley, which has tons of warehouses. And there was a party going on. And my husband and I were there at this age. We were, 10 o'clock at night. We were at this huge party in this warehouse that you walk in and it's all cement floors. And there's a dance floor and a band. And on this side, there's a stairway leading up, very utilitarian steel stairway leading up to a balcony area. And that had carpeting and cozy chairs and a place to put your purse and a big bar, and you could get anything you wanted to drink. So I went up and put my coat and my purse in one of the little cubbies and came back down. We were dancing. And it got to be 2 a.m. and I was tired. And I said to my husband, I think I'm ready to go. He goes, okay.
And this is all the dream, right? This is all a dream.
All a dream.
Okay. Yep.
All a dream. And so I walk back up the staircase, and halfway up, all the sounds go away. Everyone downstairs is gone. And I don't really think anything of it. And I go back up, get to the top. There's nothing there. And the first thing I can think of is, oh my God, where's my purse? Where's my purse? And I mean, the bar was gone, the carpeting was gone, everything was gone. Sorry. And instead, it was like somebody had turned it into an art gallery. But there are these just huge chalkboards on the wall with spotlights on the chalkboards. And coming from this side all the way wrapped around to that side in chalk letters about, that tall, with the words, take my legacy and run, take my legacy and run, take my legacy and run. And I woke up and it was kind of like, okay, then.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, I can do this. And it really breathed back life back into me and into the book. And I reached out and asked for help. And that dream is partly what shaped the book the way it is today. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was intense.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us,
welcome.
Christine. That's a powerful story. Powerful dream. Powerful dream.
Yeah.
I am a little curious now after that. You definitely took that legacy and ran with the book. Are you still taking that legacy and running? And what are you doing with that?
Weiser would love another book from me. If I don't have the authenticity and the passion that I had for the book that I wrote, I can't write in that field. So I'm still looking around. I haven't ruled anything out. But if it's not authentic, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can't put as much heart and love and passion into the next project that I put into this one, then I have no business to write it.
Mm-hmm.
I had three things, which after I wrote the book, I realized I was following. The first one was, why this book? I'm the only one who could tell the story.
Yeah.
The second one is, who's my audience? Everyone who's ever read and liked and enjoyed Scott's books. And the third one was, what is the message you want them to walk away from? Because the worst thing in the world is to read a craft book, close it, and then not remember anything about it.
Yeah.
You have no
Very
idea.
dissatisfying.
You have no idea what the message was. So my message for the book was really to be kind.
Hmm.
Yeah, because Scott was nothing if not kind, especially to people he didn't know. You can't give people the benefit of doubt, give them their dignity. And I hope that's what comes through in the book. So if I can't answer those three questions on any other project I'm trying to create, I won't do it. I can't.
Yeah. Well, I hope, at least because I feel like I hope you can answer those questions sometime for another book for you, because I can just tell that there is a wealth of experience and wisdom that could also be shared from your perspective too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, Christine, thank you again so much for coming on that 90s Witch and sharing Scott's legacy with us here and talking a little bit more about what your experience was like and how your life was so shaped by being the sister to one of America's, if not the world's, first public published witch influencers. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Trace, for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Yes, me too. And we'll have to have you back on. I'll be sure to let you know.
Oh, great.
And yeah, and people go check out Christine-Ashworth.com and find out all the things that Christine is up to. And we'll see you next time.